Well, it's good to be back. Thank you so much for the time away. It was refreshing. It was really, really good. Time in Mexico was amazing. You're going to hear more about that in the 28th of July as we talk more about what God did during that trip. And then my family and I just kind of went like 3 a.m., got back, and then at 9 a.m. left for vacation. Just didn't waste any time. Went right on it. I don't suggest that plan, but it went really well. Really good time away with family, and so we thank you so much for being away. The elders and I, actually just Tony and I were talking this morning briefly. It's just so good to be in a church where you can start to see leadership just emerging that's not built on the pastor. And so thank you so much for being a church that's willing to take things on, being willing to lead in different ways. And I wasn't going to do this, but I am going to do it now because it just needs to be done. But I know we often talk about these hangouts and things like that, but you forget the fact that somebody needs to lead all of those. And so I want to say thank you so much for Catherine for doing that behind the scenes. She loves when I call her out. And so if you could just make it really awkward for her, thank you. But that takes a lot of work and a lot of dedication and a lot of moving parts, especially when people are like, I got an idea, and it's like last minute, and she's like, that's great. So thank you so much for that and also for leading us, and just all of you who are leading behind the scenes, and we just really appreciate you so much, and it's just good to step away and come back and know that this is good. We're good. So thank you so much for that. To those who preached, thank you so much. Tony, Stephen, Michael in the back, thank you so much. Just the last couple of weeks, I learned so many things watching you guys online. And so even in the fact that I've mispronounced Haman apparently wrong the whole time. And so Stephen's like, Haman, and I'm like, is it Haman? And so I'm learning things as we go. So today it may be Haman, it may be Haman. Who knows where we're going to go today. But here's where we've been in the book of Esther. We're hitting into chapter 5. And here's our main idea, again, is how we follow and who we follow is vitally important. And this morning you're going to see a dichotomy of Esther following Jesus and following God, and Haman following himself. And you're going to see very clearly where those two go this morning in chapter 5. But leading up to chapter 5, the last couple chapters, we've seen Xerxes' power struggle. We've seen an idea of Tony introducing us to who Esther is and who her cousin/uncle Mordecai is, and we've learned about their relationship. Stephen helped us to see the importance of seeing the unseen, and then Michael last week talked about our identity in Christ as being our foremost priority, and seeing her identity in God and how he's called Esther to do what she was going to do. So those are kind of leading us to where we are. Those are some main points. But the storyline has been Xerxes has gone to war. It did not go well for him. He's come back defeated, and now he has gotten rid of his first wife, and now he's brought Esther in. This has been years and years and years of her being there. And finally, there came a point last chapter where this is her moment. And Mordecai's like, hey, here's your moment. This is your time. And so now we're at that hinge point of what's going to happen in the story. Every chapter kind of leaves us that way, but especially last week, because last week Michael talked about Esther chapter 4, and in verse 16, he says, go and gather the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. So there's this hinge point. She's like, hey, I'm ready. Let's do this. I'm going to go meet before the king. But we're going to fast and we're going to pray before we make this decision, which is a wise idea. It's a wise decision. And so she says, let's fast and pray. And then we're left with a very powerful ending of chapter 4, where it simply says, if I perish, I perish. And so this week we get to see what happens as Esther approaches the king. Will she die or will she live? Sadly, she dies and the book's over. I'm kidding. She doesn't die. You're like, really? So what are the last 5 chapters about? So she makes it, but this morning we're going to see in chapter 5 how she makes it through, and there's so much more to chapter 5 that we really have time to dive into, but I want to kind of just draw your eyes and attention to a couple points. As we head into chapter 5, let me read all of chapter 5, and then we're going to kind of get the detailed view after we get the high view of chapter 5, beginning in verse 1. On the third day then, so this is after fasting, on the third day Esther put on her royal robe and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's quarters, while the king was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room opposite the entrance of the palace. There's a lot of geography, a lot of location at play there. And when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight, and he held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter, and the king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, even if half of my kingdom." And Esther said, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared for the king." Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, so that we may do as Esther has asked." And so the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. And as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther, "What is your wish? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." Then Esther answered, "My wish and my request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my wish and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said." And Haman went out that day joyfully and glad of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he neither rose nor trembled before him, he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. And nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, and he sent and brought his friends and his wife Zeresh. And Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king had honored him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and the servants of the king. Then Haman said, "Even Queen Esther, let no one but me come with the king to the feast she prepared. And tomorrow also I'm invited by her together with the king. Yet all this is worth nothing to me so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate." Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Let a gallows 50 cubits high be made," or 78 feet, basically 75 feet high be made, "and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go joyfully with the king to the feast." And this idea pleased Haman, and he had the gallows made that day. So we find ourselves now in the story. Esther is now going before the king. She's in the throne room, and we're going to kind of pull some points out of chapter 5. Chapter 5 is built specifically to show you the difference between Queen Esther and Haman himself. Chapter 5 will show us the opposing realities of who and how we follow. One will show you how to remain immature toward God and toward His plans, and the other, wow, fresh back, and one will show us how to grow up and live out God's plans. Today, I want you to know that God has not changed. He is still the same as He was in Esther as He is today, and He's seeking and asking us to follow Him. Follow me, follow my plan. Esther, follow me as I work behind the scenes to accomplish the deliverance of my people. And He's asking us as a church community, hey, follow me as I lead you. Follow me into this community. Follow me into the parts of your life that you don't maybe think I exist in, but follow me in all of these areas. Chapter 5 is the beautiful reminder of what Pastor Dwight Smith says. Whatever God is doing in the world, oh, you're a good man. Thank you. Whatever God is doing in the world, He's going to do through all of Christ's people. Let me remind you of this morning. Whatever God is going to do in this world, whatever God is going to do in the life of King Xerxes, in the life of his people, whatever He is going to do in 2024, He is going to do through all of Christ's people. That means you, and that means me. That means the church isn't built on the senior pastor. That means the church isn't built on a group of pastors. That means the church is built on the saints that are in the room. That means He has built His church on you all. And so as we think of following Christ, the reminder we have is whatever God is going to do in the world, He's going to do primarily through you. Well, I don't know. I mean, have you seen my life? I'm not sure God wants to use me. Yeah, He does. He wants to use you. Whatever He's going to do in the world, He's going to do through all of God's people. This means that not just church leadership, but every man, woman, and child is called to be involved in taking the gospel to the people around them. It's not just you, it's not just me, it's all of us together have been called to reach those around us. Matthew chapter 28, verses 18 to 20, and Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore," wow, it's been a bit. "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always, even to the ends of the age. One second. We've all been asked to follow. Not some of us, not one or two of us, all of us have been asked to follow. And like last week, we read these instructions with a bit of a warning attached, because even as Esther was told he's going to use all of you, in Esther chapter 4, verse 14, we heard last week, if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise from the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. The warning to Esther, it can be our warning as well in how we follow Christ. Hey, follow me. All of you will be used in reaching those around us. But don't be too caught up in ourselves, because whatever God's going to do, he's going to do through all God's people. And he says, who knows? Maybe he'll use somebody else. He says, if you keep silent at this time, maybe it'll come from somewhere else, but God's going to do what he's going to do. His plans will not be stopped, but we could miss the joy of following, right? We could miss the joy of following Christ in whatever he's asked us to follow him into, and miss the blessing and miss the entire story. Esther could have missed it all. But instead, she says, I'm going to follow Christ. I'm going to follow God into what he's brought me into. This morning, again, we're going to see that Esther will be our role model, and Haman will be our fool. The guy that we're like, I don't want to be that guy. So you're going to see these two separate slides here, Queen Esther on one and Haman on the other. And here's where the verses are going to kind of flow. The author does this on purpose, but he puts the first section here in verses 1 all the way through to 8, if you pull those up. And then on the other side, you'll see in verses 14 all the way to 9 all the way to 14, you see Haman. And so you're going to see the first part, we're going to look at Esther and her example of following in the first couple verses, the first half of chapter 5. And the second half of chapter 5 is the reading of like, oh man, don't do this, all right? So we're just going to kind of follow that order and that process as we go through. And here's our big thought again. Who and how you follow are incredibly important. And as we'll see this morning, Esther and Haman followed two very different people. For one, her joy was following God even if it meant losing her life. For Esther, it meant my joy is in God and in following him, even if it means losing my life. And for another, his joy was following himself, and he could lose absolutely nothing. He didn't want to let go of anything. He looks at all his possessions and all the things he has. He says, I got to have all of it. For Esther, she's willing to lose her life for the sake of her real king, which is God. And for the other, he says, it's all about me. And following himself means he could lose nothing. To put it another way this morning, Esther will show us how to be strong in following God, and Haman will show us how to be strong in following ourselves. Let's go to verse 1 here in chapter 5. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robe and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's quarters, while the king was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room opposite the entrance of the palace. First thing we see in Esther in how to follow God is she steps up to the call. Mordecai's already had a conversation with her about how this should go, and she just answers that call and says, I've fasted 3 days, I've heard the plan, God and I have talked, this is going to work out well, I'm going to step up and follow in what God has called me to do. Now, when you think step up, it's an easy thing to say, but it's a very difficult thing to live out, because anybody who entered the king's court without being summoned or without being asked or without being given approval to come in was instantaneously death, right? And the only way you knew that you survived death was if he held out the golden scepter to you. And if he held out the golden scepter to you, you knew you lived, or at least you had a shot. It didn't even mean you lived. It just meant you had a shot of actually asking your request before somebody just kills you and drags you out of the room, right? So Esther, she knows this. Everything is on the line. And I don't know if many of us have those. It's hard to bring that into 2024. You're like, yeah, that reminds me of the time. Like we don't have that. We don't have that moment. Like, yeah, before I went in to ask my boss for that raise, I could have died. No, he would have just said no, but maybe it felt like death. I don't know, but we don't really have that feeling of like, man, I could lose my life in this situation. Most of the time, it's in the crazy stuff we do that we shouldn't do, and you're like, man, I almost died. That was awesome, right? This is not that. This is, I'm going on behalf of somebody, and this could end up very badly for me. And so we have to understand all that's at play as she steps up to do what God has asked her to do. And for many of us, he's going to ask us maybe not to step up and risk our life, but maybe he's going to ask us to step up and risk embarrassment. Some of us, he's going to ask us to step up and risk maybe some cost financially in something. Maybe he's going to ask us to step up and risk your reputation with a friend or somebody that you love, because, man, if I start sharing Christ with them, it's going to get weird, it's going to get awkward, and I'm not sure how it's going to go, and it could cost me the friendship. And that's hard. It's not your life, but it's hard, right? It could cost me an awkward relationship with my family, knowing that my family's not saved, and I need to know, I want them to follow Christ as I do, and this could cost me. And some of you in this room, you've stepped up to things, and it has cost you, and you're like, I know that feeling. We still don't talk, or we still don't have a close relationship because I stepped up. And here's the thing, it's still the call to all of us in the room to step up and follow God and follow after him. And she does this in verse 1. She steps up to the request. Verse 2, she continues in verse 2, and when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight, and he held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. This was kind of how it was done at that time. Queen Esther, this is interesting. When he says Queen Esther, you want to highlight and circle the word queen here, because this is going to be a familiar term in chapter 5. Because here's the thing, when we talk about following Christ, is not only is it stepping up, but we step up because we know who we are. I'm not going to go long on this point because Michael covered this really well last week on our identity in Christ. But her identity is being seen here. It wasn't just that she got real prettied up, or got all these things. But it's not that she just put on a royal robe and, now she's attractive. She's actually putting on her power and her strength and her role, okay? This isn't like, she was much prettier that day. This is authority. This is queen. This is, I should be the one in charge. Like, this is a step forward for her. And this is her stepping into her role as queen. And we could look at her and say, man, she was beautiful and all these things, but this was different. Because in chapter 5, we're going to see queen mentioned more than probably any other chapter outside of chapter 7. We're going to see the word Queen Esther so many times. And the reason the author does that is because they want us to see that she's doing her role. She's knowing her identity, and she's stepping into her identity. It's not just Esther anymore. It's not just her Jewish name anymore early on. It's now queen. And she steps into this role and places her identity in this role. And the king looks at her and says, that's my queen. She has dignity. She has worth. She's no longer just beauty pageant anymore. She has power and sway. And now she puts this identity and she steps into it. And for many of us in the room, we know when we follow Christ, there are many opportunities for us to step into our identity, or there's plenty of opportunities to step out of our identity in Christ. And especially when we start sharing our faith, right? Well, my testimony, my story is not really good. I don't know if anybody wants to hear my grace story. They should hear so-and-so's grace story. No, it's your story. It's your world. It's your identity. And when we go and we share Christ, no matter where we're going, when we share Christ, it's stepping into our identity. And here's what your identity is. You are a son and you are a daughter of a king. So when you approach someone, it's not coming in arrogance and saying, do you know who I am, right? It's coming into that conversation, into that relationship, knowing my identity is fully, confidently set. I am a son and daughter of the king. No matter how this goes, no matter how I share my faith, no matter what happens, I'm still his. Even if they reject it, even if they want nothing to do with it, that's on them. I'm going to continue to step into my identity. And my identity is I am a son and daughter of a king. And he has asked me to follow him. Don't miss this. I'm going to share this a lot this morning, and I know I already have. You're going to get sick of hearing it, but don't miss the fact that he has called you to this identity. He's asked you to come. Follow me. It isn't like, hey, follow me or die. Like that's part of it, but that's not his invitation here. The invitation is, come on, follow me. This is going to be amazing. the joy, the excitement of somebody picking us and saying, come on, follow me. It's a different kind of identity when we understand Christ in that role, God in that role saying, follow me. As we jump into that identity and know that worth and that value, she knows who she is, she knows her identity, and now she's displaying it in this royal sense as she approaches the king. Verse 3, then the king said to her, what is it, Queen Esther? Right? This isn't like, what is it? This isn't just, what is it, Esther? This is, what is it, my queen? What is it, my royal counterpart, right? What is it, Queen Esther? That word is in there, and it's written in there for importance. What is your request? It shall be given to you even up to half of my kingdom. And this may be true, maybe in half of his kingdom, which was all of Persia, which we showed you the map. It's big. I'll just take India, thank you. He didn't probably possibly mean half his kingdom, because we see this phrase a lot, but he did open up the thing to say, whatever you want is yours, okay? And in this, there's a selflessness in Esther. What is it, my queen? What is your request? Because here's the thing, the edict had already gone out, right? The edict had already gone out that all the Jewish people were going to die. It would have been very easy if you or I were in that scenario to be like, whew, I made it through the front, I made it to the request, I haven't died. Maybe instead of not asking for all the Jewish people, maybe I'll just ask for myself. I don't know if that would have crossed her mind, but it would have crossed my mind. Like, I would have loved all these people, but maybe all the people would be too much. Maybe I could get spared, though, so if you could just spare my life when this edict comes out and you find out I'm Jewish, could you just spare my life? But no, instead, she says, I have a request, and she thinks not of herself, and she thinks of the whole Jewish nation at the time, which was expansive and huge and had a lot of money, and she is selfless. When we come to following Christ, it's stepping up. It's knowing who we are. It's being selfless. It's when you enter into those conversations with people in your circle, it's being selfless. And here's what that could look like for you in 2024. In selfless conversations, it means you shut up a little bit. It means you ask really good questions. It means you let them talk more than you talk. It means you get to hear their story without being like, man, where's my opening for the gospel? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? There, right? It's just listening. It's just hearing their story. Selfless is key. I'll share more of this at the end, but when I went into Mexico, it was refreshing to go into Mexico with a goal. And one of my goals going into Mexico was talk less, listen more. And so every place I went, I would catch myself being like, I should not talk. I should, nope. And I listened, and God stretched me in that. Matthew can attest to this. There's many times where I'm like, I don't want to listen anymore. I want to talk. And I want them to stop talking. But I'm going to listen. I'm going to listen. I'm going to be selfless in this. And I'm telling you, the things that were learned in being selfless and listening were mind-blowing. When you just listen and you just let the silence be there, isn't it amazing when those conversations happen how much you understand about the person that they never would have shared before if you would have just kept going like this, right? Because there's layers to people, and eventually they start to open up more, and finally you get to hear their real heart. So being selfless is key to this. The next one here, 5:4-8. She continues, and Esther said, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today. She already had this planned. Come today to a feast, not like in the future. This is already happening. Come to the feast today that I prepared for the king. Then the king said, bring Haman quickly so they may do as Esther has asked. Haman's schedule gets completely hijacked. The king's like, hey, it's happening in about 2 hours. Let's go. We're meeting the queen. She wants us to have a feast. We're going. So they go into this feast that she's prepared. And as they were drinking wine at the feast, the king said, Esther, what is your wish? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even half of the kingdom, it shall be fulfilled. Then Esther answered, my wish and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my wish and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the feast I prepared for them tomorrow. To which, if you know the story, you're like, that's not the plan. The plan is the deliverance of the people. It's not just to throw another party. Like, we've had our parties. Like, aren't you just kind of wasting time here? Because we got things to ask, and you're already asking them to come to a second party. But here's the beauty of what she's asking. She is strategic, and she is smart in what she's doing. She's inviting to a meal that day, right? Which is strategic, right? If you say, hey, can we meet sometime next week? What happens? I either forget about it, something gets on the calendar, something gets busy, right? If somebody says, hey, can we go to lunch today? Isn't that weird moment where you're like, wait a minute, my calendar hasn't been checked. I'm not really sure what to do. My calendar hasn't told me if I can or if I can't. Give me a minute, right? So there's an immediacy here. Hey, come to the feast today. There's nothing on the calendar. We're good. Come on, let's go to the feast. And then strategically, she invites him to another feast. And why this is smart is because she's using Xerxes' own strategy of a party in chapter 1 against him. She's already seen it before. 6 months, 7 days of partying. The king likes it. We're going to be good if I ask for a party. Like, this is smart. This is strategic. She's using the venue of a public request, again, chapter 1, to hide and to also call out humiliation. Here's what I mean by that. She's asking them both to come publicly to a party where they're present, where they have to be eye to eye with each other and her to make her request known. And that's important. You're going to see that in another chapter. Honor would be huge on Haman's mind right now. He'd have his guard down because look at me. Haman's like, look, I'm with the king and with Esther. I've finally made it. One more step and I'm king, right? If I take out a couple more people, Xerxes can fall. Look at where I can go, right? Haman is all about the next level, and this would totally take him off his guard. Strategic, best that Haman would have to deal with the king around the table rather than in private, right? It'd be better to have eye contact around the table with the queen rather than them having a conversation in private. Because we saw how the conversation in private went without the women in the room, correct? It didn't go well. There was an edict and Vashti was gone, and let's just do that. Let's make men rulers of their own home, right? Which you're going to see later is not true even in Haman's world, okay? He talks a big game, but he ain't in control much in his own house. You're going to see that in a second, okay? Let's get eye contact. Let's get face to face. He says, I want this to happen in a less formal way where I can make this a more familiar request. And we will see next week that God uses the time in between the first party, the first feast, and the second feast the next day. God does incredible things in 24 hours. Can I just say, if you don't know it, God is not limited to a timetable, and God can do incredible things in 12 hours, in 10 hours, and 2 hours. God does incredible things in our story here in less than 24 hours. So in Esther chapter 5, 4-8, she's strategic, she's smart, and becoming obedient to the what, even when she doesn't know the how. And when we talk about following Christ, he's going to ask us at times to be obedient to the what, even when we don't know the how. The what is that I'm able to share my faith. The what is that I'm able to go and have a conversation with somebody about the gospel. And even though I don't know how it's going to go, I don't know what's going to come up, but I'm going to go because God has called me to do it. We follow in that obedience. We continue then. Esther has given us this beautiful picture of what it means to follow in a way that's godly, in a way that's honoring to Christ. And now we get the second half of Esther chapter 5, and we get the beautiful, ridiculous Haman. I said before, this book is a lot of irony, like ridiculous irony, like laughable irony. The Jewish people look at this book, and there's times where they just burst out in laughter because they're like, this is so ridiculous. This is that moment. Haman is so ridiculous in verses 9 to the close that we see when we don't follow our God, but we follow ourselves, this is what happens. So chapter 5, verse 9. And Haman went out that day, joyful and glad of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he neither rose nor trembled before him, he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. The picture painted, right? I'm on top of the world. I hate this guy. I'm the worst. The guy would flip on a dime. I don't know if you know those kind of people, but they're not fun to hang with, right? The ones that are just like, on top of the world, I'm the best, it's everything's great. And in a moment's notice, something can trigger in their world, and they're just like, I hate, I'm despised, and their attention just zooms to the other side. How does that happen? Well, in Haman's sense, let me tell you how that happened. That happened when he fueled his ego. And when your ego is all you have, when your pride is all you have, and your pride is elevated to this level and things are going well, it's like dumping gasoline onto a bonfire. It's fueling that thing, and it's awesome, right? They love me. I'm at the top of my game. I am the best person in the room. I've made it. I'm here. But here's the problem with weak egos. Weak egos and weak pride can turn on a dime. And if that's you this morning, and you're like, that's totally me. I have moments where I'm on top of the world, but then the next second I'm at the bottom and I hate everything about it, right? I'm going to tell you, maybe part of that is this idea of an ego that's built on something that is not secure. If it is that turbulent, where you could go off and feel that, the problem is there's some kind of pride ego thing that you're not dealing with. That God's like, hey, that's not normal. In this story, to go from I'm the best, I'm with the king, to all of a sudden somebody doesn't bow to him or show him respect, and it just engulfs his entire life. It just takes over his entire world. He can't do anything but fixate on the fact that this one Jewish person did not bow and did not respect him. That kind of turbulent person, honestly, and I say this in love, needs help. And I mean that in love. But they need help. And here's where they need help. Their ego is built on something that is so teeter-tottery, that's not even a word, tipsy-turvy, that's not even a word, that's so out of balance, there's we go, that's so out of balance, it's so out of whack to make somebody go from 0 to 60 like that. Something's at the root of it, and I'm going to guess they haven't dealt with it. And Haman has not dealt with the fact that his ego is fully in control, and so much in control that his pride swings from one ego to the bottom, and it swings quickly. He fuels his idolatry. He fuels himself. If you want to follow yourself, keep pouring gas on your pride. Look at me. Everybody respect me. Everybody know me. Everybody better know my name. Everybody fear me, right? Pour gas on that and see if that doesn't destroy every relationship around you. See if it doesn't burn to the ground things that you once loved. And I'm telling you, it's going to happen with Haman, but it's so obvious on the outside, but can we be honest? It's so hard to see on the inside. If you were to even talk to a person like that, they're like, I don't have a problem. What are you talking about? That's your problem. You just see me wrong. To which you're kind of like, well, there it is. I can just now walk away, right? It's so hard to see internally. But if we are honest and if we're humble, there's something in us that God's trying to root out and say, this isn't about following and fueling your idolatry and pride and ego. This is about following me, and that's way different. It's way better, okay? There's this moment where he's completely fueling it, and then in verses 10 to 13, he continues. He sees Haman. He doesn't bow to him. He has a fit. He breaks down. He's filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself, which is such an ironic word. Did he? Really? Maybe he thought he should kill him right then. We don't know. But he restrained himself, went home, and he sent and brought his friends and his wife Zeresh. And so he has this moment where he's consumed in anger, and then he brings all of his friends around and his wife, and Haman recounted them what? Himself. His stuff. His honor. His pride. He showed him his burning bonfire that he's pouring gasoline on. Guys, aren't I awesome? Look how awesome I am. Don't you guys love how awesome I am? I have everything. Aren't I the best? If you know those kind of people, you know they don't have many friends. If you know those kind of people, you know that the friends they have are really, they just kind of are the same way. And Haman here in this story is showing us the ironic and the idiotic piece of who he is. And he continues to recount to the split. He brings them together, and his ego is so bruised by one man not bowing and not telling him he's doing awesome. His ego is so bruised, he's got to go and rebuild it himself. Look at this. He recounted to them the splendor of his riches. Guys, remember I have money? I'm really rich. Remember that? I'm really rich, guys. I got a lot of money. Whatever you need, I got money. He recounted the number of his sons. Guys, I've got a lineage to follow. I am going to be generations full of me. To which we're like, oh, no thank you. All the promises with which the king has honored, he's honored them on me. And how he had advanced him above the officials and the servants of his king. Guys, I've just climbed the ladder. Look at me. I'm next in line. I am VP. He starts showing off his privileges. He pulls all his degrees off the wall. Guys, look. He probably had them like bronzed around his room, right? And everybody's like, yeah, we know, bro. You have them up every single day. Yeah, look, I'm climbed the ladder. Look how awesome I am. To which his friends and wife, you have to be thinking like, yeah, this is Haman, right? Like, we don't get their response. But my guess is, as you see the end, that they're just like him. And he advanced him above the officials and servants of the king. Then Haman said, even Queen Esther, let no one but me come with the king to the feast she prepared. I don't know if you know who you're dealing with right now, but Queen just let me and the king in for a little party. You guys weren't there. Oh, you weren't there? Okay, sorry. That was just for me then, apparently, right? It's just so dripping with condensation, what's the word I'm looking for? He's so dripping with ego and pride that he's just putting down everything else around him. And we're just kind of just watching him go into the stupor. He's building his ego again so much. It's being selfish. It's not realizing the ego that's part of him is destroying him. One of the books I got the privilege to read over the last 2 weeks was The Pursuit of God by A.W. Tozer. I highly recommend. But in this book, he says, the ancient curse, let me just put this up for you. The ancient curse will not go out painlessly. The tough old miser within us will not lie down and die obedient to our command. He must be expelled from our souls by violence. The cross is rough and it is deadly, but it is effective. Woo! This guy was uneducated, never went to college, never graduated high school. Hello. Can God speak, right? I read that and I thought immediately of Haman. The ancient curse, that thing that it is intended to do is to not let go. For many of us in the room who follow Christ, you know this on a regular basis. We follow Christ, but there are days where that ancient curse will not go out painlessly. That tough old miser will not lay down to our command or be expelled. He's got to come out by violence, and that violence only gets met in the cross. Only the cross is that death a Christ could give. The cross is rough and it is deadly, but it's effective. That is what Haman needed, but he completely rejects him being selfish and not selfless. 5:14. Here's what we see in 5:14. I'm just going to give it to you ahead of time. Be stupid and be sure and gather those around you who will cheer on your stupidity. Right? If you want to make your life miserable, be stupid about your decisions and your choices, and then gather a bunch of other stupid people around you to be like, that's a great idea. You should do that. The Bible's filled with them. But Haman is now in this scenario, and he says, I am so mad. And here's their advice in verse 14. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said, here's what you should do. Build a gallows 50 cubits made high, 70 feet high, 75 feet high. In the morning, tell the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. That sounds like a great plan. You're going to see the irony of that later. But he does so because he gathers himself an entourage, and that entourage is simply on for the money, the riches, the sons, everything he just bragged about. That's what they want. They want nothing to do with him, and he continues on his own. And if we're going to continue to follow our ego and follow ourselves, that's where it will sadly lead. 5:14 at the very end, follow your own wisdom enough that others are seen as then expendable. It's not just that we're stupid about our decisions. If you follow yourself long enough and you don't follow Christ, if you follow yourself down those paths long enough, what happens is you follow your own wisdom enough that others are then seen as expendable. Mordecai was just another name at this point. He was just expendable. He was able to just be tossed into the rubbish with everything else. And here's the problem. I think when we follow our own way and follow our own wisdom and follow our own path, and we get that selfish thing fueled and all that kind of stuff, isn't it true that when we're fueling our selfish wants and desires, that the people around us just become expendable? They don't really matter. If they were really my friend, they would tell me what, they'd just go along with it. They're really not that important in my world. Dude, they've been your friends for like 10 years. Yeah, I don't need them anymore. We saw this early during COVID, right? When some disagreements started to happen between friends, and you could have been friends for 5, 8, 10 years. All of a sudden, this thing happens and blows up in our country, and all of a sudden, it's like, man, I haven't seen that person in months. Why? Because unfortunately, they saw you, or you saw them, I don't know, as expendable. They don't agree with my point of view, so they're just expendable. I don't need to deal with them. In the worst case scenario with Haman, it's to the point it's not just expendable, it's he's worthy of death. I could take his own life. I don't even care anymore. We follow ourselves long enough, those things start to happen. And here's the big thing we're getting back to again. Who and how you follow are incredibly important. And Christ has asked us to follow him and to put ourselves on the back burner. And here's the thing. A couple questions as we wrap up this morning. One, do you actually believe that God has a plan? Do you actually believe that God has a plan and that that plan involves you? Or do you believe that God has a plan to save this world or save this community or save your circle of influence, right? But maybe he's not going to use you. Or do you actually believe he has a plan and you're part of that plan? And he's called you to be part of that plan on purpose. And he's called you to be part of that circle by design. Even if that circle is your family, your friends, he's called you to be part of it. Do you believe he actually has a plan? Or do you feel like God's too busy running other things? He's not really, there's no way he has a plan for my life. The reality is he does. The reality is he's so excited about it. He continues to ask you to follow him on a regular basis. Do you believe he actually has a plan? Or opposite, do you just assume it's either not for us, right? He has a plan, but it's not for us. It's not for those around here. It's for other people. Do you believe it's for other people and not for us? Or secondly, do you believe it's all up to us, right? Remember 4:14 where he says, hey, don't you know that you've been called to such a time as this? Don't you know that you could miss it? I'm still going to accomplish what I'm going to accomplish, and you could miss it, but don't miss it. Come alongside of it. You see, it's not all up to us. It's not all on your shoulders. There was an opportunity on Tuesday during Mexico to do a pastor's conference or pastor's teaching, and during that teaching, I said it's almost like we need to kind of take a moment where we kind of take all that weight and expectation that we put in that backpack of following Christ, and we need to kind of just take that backpack off and put it to the side and say, Christ, I can't carry this anymore. It's up to you to carry it. And Christ doesn't look at us in disappointment and be like, I knew you couldn't carry it. Instead, no, it's not what he does. He instead picks up the backpack and he's like, finally, you let go of the thing. It's about time. I was wondering how long you get tired. You're pretty resilient. Yeah, no, I'm a fighter. I can white knuckle my things through a lot of things. And he's like, I know. I've been trying to beat your hands off it for years. I know how strong you are. I want to know how weak you can be. I don't know, God. It's about time you give me the backpack and let me just kind of show you how following me is easy and light and good and not white knuckle anymore. Maybe that's for you. Do you know how to follow? Do you know how to follow? Is it built with joy in Jesus? Is it built in joy or is it built out of obedience? We just said I got to do it. Pastor said I gots to. Or is it built on joy of knowing him? You see, there's a difference between just following blind obedience and actually knowing him. And when you know him, you follow with joy. You follow better when you know him better. I'm going to bring the team up to lead us in a new song, and I want to just kind of give you a quick caveat to it as we end this morning. This idea of knowing him and knowing the joy of him, right? I said before that I was going to share about Mexico, and one of the things in Mexico was another awareness factor, another aha for me was it was probably like Wednesday of the trip, and we did this journaling thing, and the whole team did it, and I was writing down some things in the journal, and on Tuesday or Wednesday, I can't remember which day it was, I actually wrote in there, it feels good to finally follow and not be fully in charge. And writing that made me realize, like, I don't know, you guys wonder what I only work one day a week, so Sunday is my day, so you're welcome. But during the week, many of you guys are like, I knew it. I'm kidding. And he takes 3-week vacations? No. I realized how much of my schedule I set myself. And I don't know if that's kind of your world or not, but I set a lot of my own pace. So I can set it pretty heavy, or I can set it pretty light. I can set my calendar. And I didn't realize until I was actually away from my calendar how much that burden was on me of like, man, it just feels good not to set my own calendar for this week. To just go to somebody else and be like, what are we doing? And they're like, let me tell you what we're doing. And I'm like, that's awesome. I'll do it. Let's do more of that, right? And I didn't realize how much of my world was constantly me being like, set the pace, set the tone, let's go, let's go, let's go. I'm a doer by nature, man. It's what I do. But it was so freeing to follow. And when I followed in that way versus the day-to-day grind that can just be a part of our life, it was just a good moment to be aware of God, that there's a joy in following you. Because it wasn't just a joy in following the team leads that were there. It was great. They made it easy. But it was a joy in following him. And it was an awareness for me where I came back and said, God, when I get back, I don't want to set my calendar like I did before. I want to come with a joy and expectation of, God, what do you have today? Where are you going? What are we doing this week? And here's the thing. You can ask that question on a regular basis, and you think, well, then God's going to answer you every single time. No, there's multiple times where I've prayed it, and God's like, I don't know, what do you want to do? And I'm like, that's not fair. But the goodness of him, where he's not going to be that oppressor either. He's going to come and say, let's set this together. Let's dream about what we can do. Let's guide you into the right relationships again. There's a joy in following, and that joy only comes the more we know him, right? As you know him better, following becomes easy. We're going to sing this song together, and you can remain seated where you are. But I wanted to kind of give you a caveat to it because it's new. And so I want to ask you to think of the words as we sing through it. But this was a song that was brought to our attention actually while we were on the trip, and it's one that kind of just stuck with, and I think it just follows well with our series on Esther. And it says, man, I've come to know the joy of Christ and the love of who he is, and because I know him, following is easy. And there's a bridge here in this song. And there's a bunch of things that says yes to this and yes to that and yes to your plans for my life. And so I would ask you just to use this time to listen to the words, let them kind of resonate over your heart and over your mind. If you know it, you can sing along, but I would ask you just to kind of listen to the words as we sing them. And when we get to the bridge, it's just an open invitation for you to just open your hands and say, yes. Whatever it is, wherever you're leading me, yep, I'm in. And allow that to kind of be your posture as we end this morning, and then I'll close this morning.